It's on my family tree, actually. And so thanks to the family check that. For now, and then it's not too far. Like if we go down to Kingston, it's like not high traffic. Everything's not so far, but it's not too bad.
This is Cassandra from Calgary.
Sorry,
Canada.
Lucy White. Nice to meet you. I'm waiting for one thing. An online meeting even. So I work for myself now. So I don't know if we crossed paths.
I don't think formally, but
okay.
yeah,
I might have seen you.
yeah. And then you did some complicated as well, right?
Yeah. Nice to see you.
Yeah, that's what
Then you're sitting by yourself, right?
I'm sorry, I was like, oh, I guess it should be the
Oh, it's like a yeah. I meant to see on those. It's really a lot bigger space. And tells you that we're working because the fire is twice or more the size.
So yeah, let's just sit down and
I think this feels good.
It's so great. Here's great. Here's great.
well, and it's so lovely to see around here to see architecture here.
Oh, the architecture here is amazing. Prior to the turn of the century, right? Kind of, sort of the 1800s buildings and stuff that you see, then dotted in with the, the early 1900s and the 40s and the 50s. It's kind of that sort of stuff. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, right there, kind of when I arrived, I was like, man, this reminds me of these islands.
Yeah.
Oh, there's two.
Yes.
You travel there?
Okay, so we're just I was amazed.
I actually just found out that
Pamela Anderson lives there. She actually lives there. Yeah, I know. I see her. She's there. Not looking at her. Yeah. And then I think you go there if you want to. We're live, so I see trees.
Okay, great. Yeah,
Good day. Welcome. Bonjour tout le monde. We're absolutely thrilled to be here at the Creative City Summit in Kingston. Thank you to Creative City team for inviting us here. On va commencer en quelques minutes. We're just waiting to see if there's anyone else who's going to join us here. Yes, the meeting will take place in English. But if you do have questions for the panel in either English or French, please do send them in on the YouTube chat, which is being monitored by our administrator, Michael Lazinski. Thank you, Michael, for making this possible. We'll see you in a couple of minutes. No, sorry, I didn't see you over there.
I know, I'm going to stand. I'm taking the seating moment right now. And Annalee Adair.
Because the thing is so good.
Kristen Bettiol.
Oh, we have other people. Let's go to this table. I'm going to make room for
Hi.
other spots here. Saving you from
Yes,
that.
I imagine. Hi. You made it. Yes, how are you?
Oh, yeah, my goodness.
Okay, bonjour, encore une fois, welcome again, everyone. Just want to welcome you on behalf of Arts Consultants Canada, Consultante Canadiana. My name is Victoria Steele. I have the pleasure of serving as chair of the board. We have a great team of board members, one of whom has put together this really interesting panel, which is on how consultants and cities work together to shape culture. Before I introduce Christina Bagatavicius, who will then introduce the rest of the panel, I just want to first acknowledge how blessed and thankful we are to be here in Kingston, but especially in this Haudenosaunee territory. Arts Consultants Canada itself, we have members across the country, so we wish to acknowledge that our association and its members work on the traditional territory of First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples, from coast to coast to coast, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. We acknowledge the historical oppression of their lands and cultures in what we now know as Canada, and fervently believe that the arts contribute to the healing and decolonizing journey that we share together. We honor their long history of welcoming many other peoples to this beautiful territory, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work here. To Indigenous artists and colleagues across the land, we thank you for the work that you do. Alors, merci en commence. And a reminder, if you wish to ask questions in English or in French, you can do so on the YouTube channel in the chat. And then, of course, the people who are here in the room in Kingston, we will be inviting your questions and comments later. I would like to now hand the floor to the chair and moderator of this panel, Christina Bagatavicius.
Hi, everybody. Lovely to meet you all, and thank you so much for making the time to be with us today. As Victoria mentioned, my name is Christina Bagatavicius. I'm the co-founder and principal at Bespoke Collective, which is a consultancy that does work across cultural planning, public engagement, communications. I'm also a member of the board at ACCA, and I was invited to think of a panel idea to bring us together. The real goal of this is just to connect in real life, in person, to network, to learn about each other and the ways in which we work. And often we find, I think, working on cultural planning projects with municipalities, it tends to be the case that we're so driven by the projects we're in, the commitments we have, the deliverables as consultants, as city planners, that often it's hard to kind of lift your head up a little bit and take a fresh breath of air and look beside you and notice the relationships and the dynamics in between what happens in the room. So when we're planning this session and chatting about it as a board at ACCA, we wanted to provide an opportunity to kind of have an open, honest, frank conversation about those relationships, about how they work, about the strengths of them, the challenges, the struggles, hear a little bit about those moments of breakthrough that sometimes happen, that, you know, sometimes when you're a consultant working on your own, you quietly at your desk, kind of give yourself a cheer, but you don't get to necessarily share that with anyone. So this is an opportunity to do that and hopefully learn from each other. And I'm really delighted today by the panel. I'm so grateful for them having made the time to be with us today, and we'll introduce them shortly. We'll have about 45 minutes where I'll ask a few questions across the panel, and then we'll have an open Q&A as well, and then a kind of takeaway wrap up at the very end. So I'm delighted to have Annalee Adair, Megan Lynch, Kristen Bettiol, and Bridget MacIntosh with us today. And I'd love, rather than sort of like cobbling together a bio, I'm going to give them each a minute or two to share who they are and what they do. Annalee?
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us. Microphone, please. Great. Thanks very much. It's great to be here and great to have a discussion about this because I think it's an important one to have. I work as part of a collective of consultants under the banner of EVOKE 2.0, Culture 2.0, and have a background working in municipalities, in cultural services, working in the nonprofit and the education sector. And so I'm just interested in learning all the time. And so this is an opportunity to do that today. And I look forward to collaborating with my colleagues. Thank you.
And I just want to say that Annalee was the consultant on the Lethbridge Cultural Plan that won the award for cultural planning last year.
Congratulations.
Could you repeat that, Christina?
We just wanted to mention that Annalee was the planner or the consultant who worked on the city's Lethbridge Cultural Plan, which was awarded by the CCMC previously for outstanding work.
Great. Hi, everyone. Great to be here today. I'm Megan Lynch. I'm a senior manager at Nordicity. We are an arts and culture consulting firm. We have 3 offices, one in Vancouver, one in Toronto, and then in the UK in London. I'm based out of our Toronto office. And my background is in visual arts. I studied art history and then worked in museums and then government. And came to Nordicity, I guess it's almost been 8 years now that I've been there. And I do a lot of our municipal culture planning, as well as strategic planning. I lead our digital strategy practice at Nordicity as well, and also do a lot of our economic impact assessment work too. So a whole range of projects, but really excited to be here today to chat all things cities and consulting.
My name is Kristen Bettiol. I am not a consultant, and I recognize I am the only one in the room not a consultant. I'm with the Township of Centre Wellington, so if you know where Guelph is, because that's a university town, we're about 20 minutes north of that. It's Elora, Fergus, Bellwood area, if any of that's familiar. I am the manager of community development, and in a small rural township, that means I have culture, I have tourism, I have community development, diversity, equity, inclusion, and our local municipal theater. So a little bit of a mix in there. I've been with the township for 3 years. Prior to that, I was in the not-for-profit world, so a completely different world than the municipal world. But I'm very happy to be here.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. I'm Bridget MacIntosh. I'm a cultural strategist and creative producer. Many years ago, I started in the independent theater scene, so I have a real big love for the performing arts, and that switched into a municipal career working with various municipalities in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, managing various portfolios, events, public arts, cultural strategy, cultural planning, what have you. And after 10 years of doing that, I really just wanted to be able to work on a variety of different projects and get back to grassroots, and have had the wonderful opportunity of working with every firm pretty much here at the table. And Kristen is currently someone I'm working with right now. So very happy to be a part of this panel and have this conversation. So thank you so much for being here, Christina.
Thank you, everyone, for very eloquent introductions that are far better than anything I could have said. Much appreciated. I should also mention that Bridget and Kristen are currently working together. So we're going to kind of think about them as a pairing and have a little bit of that wonderful dialogue between planning and between consulting as part of their responses. I'll kind of layer that in, as well as having Megan and Annalee kind of share their perspectives as consultants. So I have a series of questions. There might be more questions on the questions. I'll try to be mindful of time as much as possible. The very first thing I wanted to start with is just like really genuinely from the heart a little bit, and just reflecting on what makes you most proud of the work, the cultural planning work specifically you're doing in the present. And I would love for Bridget and for Kristen to think about that together. You know what I mean? So maybe we start with you, and you can maybe share. It's like, before I get into the challenges, I'm kind of give a gentle, lobby, generous question, which is just like, what makes you most proud of the work you're doing together?
Thanks so much. And I know this will connect to what you have to say, but I would say that the knowledge exchange and the connections, so the relationships that have evolved throughout the work over the years, and in particular with our work together, just working on a cultural action plan. And we're at a point now where we're talking a lot about resources and ways that we can implement the culture plan, how I can be a good support to Kristen, who, again, as you mentioned, is juggling a very diverse and complex portfolio. But ultimately, it comes down to the relationships, and just through all the work, seeing how one relationship that I've made at one point in my career, how that can benefit and support some of the work that Kristen and even other clients are doing, and to make those connections, to leverage the information that one person has done to benefit another project and to see the magic unfold from that. So we're really seeing that with our work together, I feel. So yeah, definitely.
I just want to add, absolutely what Bridget just said. One of the things that we worked into the scope of work of our action plan was meeting on a regular basis after the plan has been adopted by council. So we're at that point and we meet, I don't want to know how many we have left because I will be afraid when you're out of my world on a regular basis. But what we have appreciated is the wealth of knowledge that comes with working with Bridget, and she's basically set up a resource library for us that from our conversations or the things that we thought were going to be challenges or things along the way that were of interest that, again, I'm 3 years old in this, and my world prior to this had nothing to do with culture. So all of the learning that we do just in conversations, those regular meetings where we're, like you had said in the introduction, but the idea that we don't really afterwards digest what process we just went through and how we go through and we're hitting those deadlines and we're getting that community engagement and feedback and then going to council and this advisory committee. And so now we're at the point where we can slow down and look at that process and see how it played out, digest it, have conversations about it, look at other examples where this went really well or this didn't go really well. And that candid conversation with Bridget on a regular basis, and I pull in different team members at different times, and just that coaching when that's not necessarily my world has been so appreciated.
That's a great insight, I guess, in the aftermath of a large deliverable, the kind of like the livingness of a cultural plan, the need to steward it, the need to kind of maintain relationships, to be able, especially now, to pivot when it's required and to do that by design as a consultant. Sounds like a really smart kind of foundation we built, which we can all learn from and hopefully implement in our future plans. Love to go to Megan next, and I would say if there's a specific project you want to speak to, please do share it with us as well.
Yeah, the collaboration between consultants and cities, it's definitely something that resonates with a lot of clients that we work with, that we couldn't do the work we do without our municipal partners really being so actively involved in everything. And a recent project that comes to mind, we completed just this past April, a culture plan for the city of Thunder Bay. And that project, we had just such a wonderful relationship with the city, and we're able to work so collaboratively with them to really be able to hear from so many people across the city. So something I was particularly proud of with that work was just how all the diverse voices of people who live in Thunder Bay were really able to come through all of our public engagements and consultations that were, in partnership with the city. That really is baked into that culture plan, that the actions, the objectives really reflects the diversity of Thunder Bay. And also, which I loved so much, was that we were able to work with a knowledge keeper in Thunder Bay as well, who was able to translate the final name of the plan and also the strategic pillars of the plan into the local Anishinaabe language. So, the diversity of the city not only is in the plan itself, but also in the title and right there in the language. So that was just a really a great outcome that we were all really, really proud to be able to make happen.
Annalee, if you want to share.
I think probably the work, what I think I would be most proud of really is putting some process around very messy community-driven work. Meaning that if you really want to authentically engage, like engaging local teams of community facilitators, community artists, working from the inside out and the outside in at the same time. So putting together an interdepartmental working group, because culture is not siloed, but it tends to be in municipalities. So getting those decision makers as a guide all the way through. But really it's about the process itself. And for me, that's been the biggest learning of how to do that and put some frameworks and tools and processes together that actually allow for that co-creation by community to actually be valid enough to make it through to council. So not just sort of engagement and then doing the analysis and saying this is what they said and then doing the recommendations, but actually having them co-create the strategies all the way through, even if it's not what senior management and council want to hear. So I would say the more, the other thing I'd be proud of, I think, is like pushing it to the next level of cultural planning in terms of trying to stretch what people are thinking about when they're thinking about cultural planning and what is culture, whose culture, was the definition of culture. It's a very messy word. So I think processes that allow for the messiness to take place and having the time to do that and really pushing people to really slow down on those deliverables so that they actually are really ensuring that we are conscious of who we're doing this for and why we're doing it. And that's internally as well as externally. So that's the piece.
Can I ask, is there a project in particular that comes to mind as you reflect on kind of slowing down the messiness?
I think all of them. I think all of them. Really, I mean, you know, it doesn't matter whether it's a small municipality or a larger municipality. It's really around that process of authentically getting to the root and the heart of what is, I would say, like a place-based piece in terms of what that particular community wants and maybe getting out of the labeling and into the kind of nitty-gritty of what it is that we're talking about here.
Thank you.
And asking a lot of wicked questions.
That's perfect. The next question I want to ask to the group to reflect on is, how do these cultural planning projects stretch you creatively, professionally, personally?
I just have a comment and a question that before we move on to the next question, if that's okay, Christina?
Yeah, go ahead.
So
Just make sure you repeat, so it's very.
yeah, so the first thing was, I wanted to say to Kristen, you're not the only one who's got a consultant in the room. People who are not consultants put up their hands. Okay, so I wanted to make sure that you felt like you were in the community of peers. So that's the first thing.
So we just acknowledged that there are many people working within cities, not consultants, in our audience. That wasn't heard.
Yeah, and the second thing that I wanted to say is again about what Kristen was saying, but I love also what Megan and Annalee are saying, but about the idea that here she is only 3 years in and she's like being almost mentored as well by Bridget in what this work actually is. And I think that we need to acknowledge that that's actually kind of needed. You know, there are people, like we've got City of Calgary here, they're pretty far along the thing, but Nelson maybe not as much. You know, so the fact is that, you know, the idea that you would have consultants as mentors in this process, I think is something that we really need to think about as well.
And for anyone who can't hear that on YouTube, Kathleen in our audience was mentioning just how important mentorship is and how that is a foundational aspect that's productive in the way that consultants and city planners can work together. And so acknowledging kind of the importance of what Bridget and Kristen shared in terms of their relationship at this stage in that project. Okay, I got another question. This is like leaning into the possibility of getting kind of like behind the scenes a little further. I wanted to ask everyone how these projects stretch them creatively, professionally, personally. From my perspective, I can share that I like moving very quickly, and I kind of run on gut instincts as a consultant. And every time I work on a cultural planning project, it's like, this is slow food cooking. Like it's a different time, and even when we anticipate the time and energy required, it's almost like you need to double it to kind of get where you need to go. So it requires a kind of, you know, almost like a marathon and a sprint at the same time, from my perspective at least, and being prepared for that, making sure you have the capacity and the space for it. that, you know, is really, really important. I've learned over the years, and that's probably one of the greatest challenges I have, is kind of sustaining that, and making sure, you know, that you let the quality of the process lead the time within reason, of course, but it can be a challenge sometimes as well. And even just the kind of city processes always take much more time than you think they're going to. I hope I hadn't stolen the thunder from any responses, but I thought
We all agree.
why don't we start somewhere in the middle? Megan, why don't we start with you, if that's all right, in terms of how these projects stretch?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think every project stretches you in some new way, right? Because no matter what city you're going into or client you're working with, it's always going to be new. So I think in some ways that's the joy of this type of work, is that you're going into a new city and being like, okay, let me learn about this new place now, and tell me everything about, you know, a place that I maybe I'd never been before, or don't know that much about what it's like to live there. And that's like obviously always a bit of a stretch, because you're learning new things every time you do a project. But I think what I also love about that too is that you're then kind of always having to be creative and think about the best ways to approach projects too. That it's not always just like copy paste, and the way you did something in this place can be exactly the way you do it in another one. But the context and the nuance of a place kind of needs to shape how you move forward, and kind of constantly needing to like adapt and be on your stay on your toes, whatever the phrase is. That's all makes it fun to be stretched in that way, and always having to kind of think creatively. I have a background in business as well. I did an MBA, and so for me, what I also really love in terms of your question around like personally being stretched, that I love kind of being able to use both sides of that of my brain. Like my sort of creative side is always kind of being stretched, as is my kind of more like quantitative kind of side. So yeah.
Thank you. Annalee, do you want to go next?
I think I just think keeping up on the change that is happening within communities is a stretch. Creatively, I would say that kind of investigation and that period of, you know, how can we look at this in today's world and also look at it in the future. So keeping 2 time horizons in view at the same time, in terms of we're looking currently, and it's hard to get people to actually think 10 years down the road, because they have such immediate concerns and crisis and so on, and problems and challenges most of the time. And so professionally, it's holding that tension between also what community needs and sector needs, and the constraints of city structures and systems. So I would say that's the stretch, is to hold that tension and try to satisfy everyone, but being real about it in terms of not selling a vision that is not going to be actually feasible to implement. So that's the stretch, I would say. And also the stretch comes from working on 2 sides of the table and getting them to think as one side of the table, and to hold that and to meet the demands of the major challenges communities are having right now. So I would say that. And I would say for me, probably patience. It's a stretch. And, you know, at a certain point in your career, you're probably a little more bold than you were when you first started this work. So that would be another one for me. It's a stretch to just try to hold that tension and not be for one side or the other, but be real with each side, in terms of being real with the sector and saying, yes, we understand you want all this, and and being real with the other side, saying, we understand you can't do all this, but somebody needs some small wins here. So using that process of human-centered design helps with iteration and taking small steps and testing with the community and with the inside. So that's a stretch in terms of negotiation.
Thank you. That's great. I can relate to the patience bit. I think I'm entering into my older years by the minute. Kristen, would you like to respond next?
So our situation was that we had a economic development and tourism strategy being done at the exact same time as our cultural action plan, at the exact same time as our theater operations and community impact study. So lots of things that, puzzle pieces that all needed to fit in and be aligned with each other by different consultants and a lot of the same players. So like those interviews that were happening and like, let's switch gears. Today we're talking about this, and moving the process of all of those studies through was a challenge. And definitely something that stretched me professionally as I'm also learning my role, and we're going through all those processes. So I think that would be my answer. Just how those different strategies come together, and then after those implementation plans are set, where are the efficiencies, the low-hanging fruit for everybody? Like, can we do one of these things that checks some boxes for everybody? So, and again, those are conversations that we have in our regular meetings, and she helps me through. So, yes, she was thinking about our cultural action plan and knows that inside out. So to have a conversation about the economic development and tourism strategy or the theater plan were comfortable, easy conversations to have.
So it sounds like working with a consultant like Bridget helps you work across the silos. Is there any other tactics or strategies that you use to kind of get across that?
I think having the different coordinators attend those meetings with Bridget, and we feel like we definitely are paying for the buck because probably more, we benefited more. But the idea that they can come to these conversations with the consultant and ask their questions. It's not even like it's asking questions, it's just having discussions, but then having everybody at the same table of their silo, but see how we all need to work together.
That's really helpful framing. So kind of casting a wider net in those mentorship advisory sessions so that some of the stakeholders in different silos can glean some of the perspective you're bringing.
Yeah.
Sounds like good value, Bridget.
And that's like a perfect segue because almost in parallel to how this worked with our project and with any project, it's a desire for us as consultants that we want to be able to provide the best service possible for our clients. We want to have those expertise, we want to have that knowledge, we want to have those skills. So for me, it's the constant learning, and it's almost to do this work well, you're forced to learn. And I say forced in the most beautiful, inspiring way possible. I was even saying earlier to Annalee, and even at the table, just to stay on top of all of the knowledge that is coming out now from many different organizations, learning those stats, understanding what other cities are doing, just to keep our toolbox full and to keep it current and to keep it relevant. So in our case, when we are in those meetings, I have those examples. I am able to look at all the different examples of the knowledge I've learned and figure out what's the best strategy to advise my clients. And I know we all do this type of work. And just as a consultant trying to navigate all this, I highly recommend the Raindrop app to bookmark different websites or what have you. There's so many white papers, like Wonderful just released sort of their takeaways from their conference. So I can save that on my phone. When I have the time, I can read it, understand what's going on in the landscape, and then I can best use that to advise my clients. So, and all of that knowledge stretches me, develops me on multiple levels. So,
sorry, was that app Raindrop?
Raindrop.
I think I'm called Pocket. But
there you go.
Which is the idea, like you just aggregate basically all your research.
Yeah, it's easy peasy just to be able while I'm browsing, save it. I'm not getting any money from Raindrop.
Free endorsement for future podcasts.
but I guess with consultants, we're all articulating with lots of information. I'm speeding up school there, so it's a method that's helped me with that work. So yeah,
that's great. Thank you. Okay, we've got another question for everyone. I want to get into the challenges question. That's always interesting. The learnings when mistakes happen, when we have frustrations emerge. When we feel like there's an impossible barrier impeding our capacity to deliver on what we promised we would. I would love to invite everyone to please share a struggle on a project that you've needed to tackle. Recently, Kristen and Bridget, you can probably share from your experience if that's not too uncomfortable, and then Megan and Annalee will have free reign on whichever project right now is a bit of a cramp in the foot. Annalee, would you like to start? Just go down. No pressure.
On a particular project or just struggle?
If you want to, I mean, if you want to treat it in an anonymous way, just to give love to that client, no worries. But we'd just love to hear a tangible struggle. Would be great.
There's always struggle with timelines. So if you're someone who likes to do the deep work, like Bridget was saying, in terms of the research and the pieces, so I would say the struggle is twofold in the sense that there's the community piece, but the struggle really, which I found more lately, is to ensure that you're actually involved internally, which is why we do the interdepartmental working group across departments like finance and treasurer and planning and recreation, and to align this plan and culture plan, but to infiltrate, and I say infiltrate kind of forcefully in terms of the struggle to infiltrate this across civic planning agenda and civic priority agenda, because culture could no longer be a siloed sector plan anymore. I don't know if it ever could really, but we're very much more, I think I'm very much more conscious of the fact that it has its own thing, cultural planning, but because of the constraints and because of the concerns these days, there's kind of a misalignment within varying municipalities, I would say, in terms of its importance or how it's viewed across departments, not realizing and recognizing that in actual fact, many other plans have the word culture in them and have deliverables around cultural deliverables that are outside the cultural planning context. So I would say, if I was going to use an example of a struggle, it was to actually go through in Lethbridge every plan, policy, bylaw, which we do now for all planning that we do, and align and see where it's mentioned, which is, over 1,000 times it's mentioned. So we actually did an Excel sheet with this in Lethbridge to provide this kind of synergy and to understand that the actual corporation, is actually dealing with culture in many pockets, which they didn't really understand. And when we brought that forward, then the struggle to its being seen as a civic planning priority became a little different. The implementation of that, is not easy, but it's to understand within the context. So the struggle really is the internal struggle for the understanding and alignment of cultural priorities that are actually part of the larger community, city building, social infrastructure, civic infrastructure piece. And that to me has been the learning or the struggle over the last, I would say couple of years, which I haven't been consulting that long. 9 years, I think. We're the last paper was in Kingston. But that is, it's almost like youth or environment or whatever. Like it has a broader context. So the struggle is, and yet the community and the sector is in such need of crisis, they see it as their plan. So the struggle is to actually work with those. I mentioned it earlier, those tensions, but that is a real struggle internally. So having a departmental working group does bring those decision makers from the front. And I would say the other struggle is to actually get to the nitty gritty of what are the resources that are going into culture right now, and how open is finance, CAO, and so on, open to having this resource, because we could do a plan and it'll sit there. So now the struggle is to actually be really at the forefront of this and bold enough to ask those questions from the beginning. And so that's a bit of a struggle for the sector too, because I'm asking those questions internally before I go out externally.
Thank you so much. I love that answer, and I love how you extracted culture across all of those documents and policies. That's a great tip for us to kind of think horizontally instead of vertically around what's happening. I appreciate your candor as well. Thanks for that, we all do. Megan, would you like to share?
Sure, yeah, I kind of have, I'm sure there's lots of challenges we can speak to, but just to build on what you were just saying, though, actually one kind of interesting model or sort of maybe solution that we recently, we worked with the city of Markham, I guess now, it was almost 2 years ago, but how they structured their culture plan was actually like embedding it from the start in their economic development plan. So they were like two separate pieces of work, but like were very much integrated. So the actions were quite tied together. So like from the very start, it was built in to like make the case for culture as this economic driver for the city. So that by the time we got to the end of it, there was less of that, needing to make the case, that it was like baked into the plan from the very beginning that culture helps to support economic development. So and that was less of a challenge, but maybe a solution to a challenge, is thinking about that integration from the very beginning. But another challenge that I'm sure we've all experienced is just in general, like survey fatigue. Everyone is being consulted and surveyed for everything these days across municipalities, everything from, I'm sure, like recycling to arts and culture. So really, thinking about kind of creative, dynamic ways to engage the community, but also kind of within those constraints that often municipalities are having to deal with, that there's these like, platforms that the cities say you have to use for surveying, like Bang the Table or what those other ones are. But how then to actually reach the people that you want to make sure you're hearing from, and to make the plan successful within these kind of consultation constraints. So solutions to that obviously are always like thinking outside the box and working with your municipal partners to reach people in the most effective ways. But anecdotally, in Thunder Bay, the project that I mentioned earlier, when they have these free outdoor concerts weekly in the summertime. So we went and had a pop-up booth at the outdoor concerts where we just chat with people about arts and culture. And what was so great about that was that because it was free, it was outside, it was in the center of the city, it was people that maybe normally were not engaging in arts and culture events. It was people from across the whole city that we were able to just have these really informal kind of conversations with, outside of those barriers that these online municipal surveying platforms often can create kind of unintentionally. So yeah.
I love that. Thank you for that example. I love that idea of kind of bringing the conversation to where people are already gathering, already meeting, already in a good mood as well, kind of feeling the energy of culture rather than on their phones on a subway commute, reluctantly looking at the survey. Another tactic I've seen that can be helpful too is just incentivizing it with a gift card, with free tickets, those kinds of things. If you don't have the capacity to be in person, that can sometimes, you'd be surprised how many people want a tote bag over the course of the So the more you can sweeten the deal and just, I think, show gratitude and generosity in your processes, maybe just to add that challenge that Megan was sharing. Kristen, sorry.
So I shared part of our struggle that we had so many different plans happening at the same time, which is its own layer. But I would also add to that, we, as the Township of Centre Wellington, were not huge contributors to the arts and culture scene traditionally. We do have a municipal theater, but it's also very dependent on third parties renting it as opposed to us putting on our own programming. And many of the cultural assets that are in the community are everybody else renting them. They're not our own. So we were not seen as cultural contributors or supporters, really. So working with Bridget gave us a new level of legitimacy, I think. So that struggle of trying to get in with cultural groups, arts and culture groups, was not really welcomed. But then when we brought these are some studies that were shared with us, or just being able to have conversations in that space, I think helped us and leveled us up to be able to start those conversations and build those relationships with community partners. And we're in a much different space now. And I think the trust has been built, which is just going, like, gives hope and a future, really, that we were not looking at before. Our culture plan lived within our Parks and Rec and culture. And this was the first time that we separated it out because Parks and Rec needed a lot. And that was a huge undertaking, and that plan is also happening at the same time, but not by me or in my area. So I think that this, taking this out, and it's not that I totally understand the whole concept of this potentially being siloed, but I think that that helped us find somebody who was going to dedicate their time and attention to us, as opposed to we're doing Parks and Rec and a little bit of culture. So I think that all of those things, it was definitely a struggle to get there, but all of those things played a part in where we are now.
Wow, the dopamine is strong right now. Yeah, no, just briefly, I mean, the struggles or the challenges, and this is not specifically with our work, but in general, it's twofold. And these plans, when we work with municipalities on developing plans and strategies, they're usually sometimes a 10-year horizon. I mean, these are important documents that are going to guide 10 years worth of investment and direction for a municipality and a whole citizenry, to do that. So in many ways, it's an education opportunity. And I find a challenge in some cases is that the economic impact of culture is undeniable, absolutely, but it is not the only argument. It certainly has, again, validity, but through the research, through being prepared, through having those studies, through having the expertise, to be able to provide good counsel to show that there is the social aspect, there is the well-being aspect. And yeah, you might not be able to quantify it, but the qualitative aspects of it are just as rich and as necessary in some cases as the number. So it's on one hand trying to not be a huge advocate, but to always have that knowledge in the back of your mind to be able to offer that as another benefit for cultural investment. And I'm finding through my work on various projects, of course, there's always the push for revenue diversification, for the cultural sector to be revenue, to be self-sustaining, to not rely so much on revenues from a municipality. And in those cases, and it came up in an interview last week, is to not go too far down that path that we lose the importance of the public good of investing in culture, like the importance of a municipality recognizing that just as much as we need roads, or as much as we need those infrastructures, there's a fundamental social good that municipalities must continue to play to preserve the human element of what is culture, is what differentiates us. So it's just, again, not staying on a soapbox, but really making sure that as these plans get developed and they cover 10-year horizons, that we're not losing that argument. So, yeah.
I really appreciate you reminding us of the importance of that. Actually, I'm working on a cultural plan right now for the city of Burlington, and 82% of residents who responded to the survey felt like well-being and the arts were integral to their quality of life. So it's interesting to also see, I think there's a public consciousness around these issues too, and we kind of, as you were saying, need to continue to carry those conversations and bring them into every room. It's easy to overlook, and you can generate revenue and contribute positively to someone's social and mental and emotional well-being. They're not mutually exclusive. So that was a really nice coupling. I appreciate that. The next question I have for you all is, we are always learning, I guess just as a general statement of human existence. I'd love you all to share something new about your work that you didn't know before. So kind of just reflecting on something new. But maybe we start with Bridget, just you're the furthest away, no pressure.
The first thing that came to my mind, I guess, what is it? What are we always learning to share something? I wouldn't say it's learning something new, but almost validating what I believed to be true from reading data and going into community and gathering feedback and researching the reports. I mean, I can sit here and come up with an idea of what I think a situation is and to come up with advice or counsel, but through community engagement, through talking with Kristen in our case and through other research, seeing that a certain issue or a certain problem does affect maybe many mid-sized municipalities or small rural municipalities. So I'd say it's not so much learning something new, but I find I'm validating beliefs and validating research or things that
And is there any kernel of knowledge you felt especially good about validating on the last bit? Like a hunch where you finally kind of had that moment where you kind of show?
I wouldn't really say it's good. I think it does lean more towards a sense of precarity. We touched on it earlier, especially with municipal managers and just the way municipalities are designed. More and more responsibility, more and more complexity, and what the trickle down is of that. And I know that's nothing new or earth-shattering, but seeing it again and again and again, it's not a one-off. It's something much larger.
So kind of evident to some of the challenges and the trends that most of these kinds of processes face.
Not necessarily grateful to you.
I'm an optimist, so I go for the rainbow part. You give me the clouds. Kristen.
There's so much that I could say on this one because I was pretty green with all of it. But I think that one kernel that I would pick out would be in our municipality, my colleague Paula and I were the ones that were working predominantly with Bridget, and just how much we needed to be on our game and soaking up the knowledge to then educate and take the next level, the senior management team, on that journey with us, for them to be able to advocate on our behalf. But they also have their own many studies that they're working on, and so it's just trying to find the thread that we can weave throughout all of those plans, like you were talking about before, and speaking their language while also speaking the language of the arts, which is a hard balance, but for us as staff to figure that out so that we can start taking everybody else on the journey, including council. That was a big one. I got lots more though. So.
Would you want to share another?
There's so many pieces to it, and the way that we folded out or were laying out all of those plans at the same time, and how to think strategically about them coming back to culture. So thinking about how tourism benefits from culture, because that's in my area, and how community development benefits from culture, and how, like you're talking about, what was the percentage, 82%, saying that is part of their well-being. Roads are about connecting people. Culture connects people. So like all these things that have no problem getting the budget have the same base values as the things in the arts and culture world, but those ones we have to fight for. So yeah, there's some.
I think that's actually a perfect segue to what I wanted to share, because I feel like it's coming up a lot through this conversation about I think it's less maybe a new piece of knowledge, but more about framing it for the right audience. That we know arts and culture has this social impact. We know it has this economic impact, but it's really understanding who your audience is and framing it in a way that's going to resonate the most with them. And that's how you can really help to advance things within municipal culture planning in particular, like the example I gave earlier around embedding that culture plan within the economic development plan, or a recent project we just did with the city of Mississauga. We did an economic impact assessment of live music for them, and these are the types of things that we're seeing really resonating a lot with city councils, that they're oh, this is we're seeing the results of our investment. And that can kind of help to push the needle a little bit. So it's nothing has really changed. It's just a matter of bringing it together in a way that resonates the most with the audience that you're presenting that to. I guess would be my kind of kernel. I think what I've learned the most is the time it takes to do this work is not ever going to be in the budget for cultural planning. So I think you could say that's a struggle, you could say it, you can see this, but, in comparison to recreation plans or whatever that might say, I think culture has reached a point now in terms of cultural planning that there's some learning from municipalities that have to be looking at this in terms of if you actually want this kind of master planning to happen, because it's reached a stage over the last 30 years or 40 years of cultural planning that maybe recreation was at a long time ago. We're slow to the table. So that's one thing I'm learning. The time it actually takes to do this work in a very true way. And I work with an Indigenous colleague, Terry Brennan. So we usually start off with Indigenous story reporting and conversation. And there's no way any municipality is going to pay for the engagement that it takes for Indigenous engagement, although we do it at that level. So there's just some learnings around how do we actually, in the RFP process, get that kind of across in terms of our process. And it is a very different process maybe than in some other ways. So that's a learning. And I think the idea of place has also been a big learning for me. Working, in Alberta is different than working in, Odessa, which is different than working in Ottawa, which is different than working, somewhere else. So in BC. So I think the learning comes from both ways. It comes from actually from the local teams that we engage of artists, and also the data that is gathered and how it's gathered and how it's reported and how people think about data presentation. So to give an example, the learning about are we in a position that we can actually present in a different way? Are we confident in our presentation of this data in new ways in order to get our points across? So are we comfortable working with Indigenous peoples and getting the stories of the land and the place from them in an oral tradition and presenting that as part of our plan? Are we brave enough to be able to tell council and tell senior management that this community is racist on the basis of what we're hearing from our community? Are we confident enough to say, in actual fact, youth aren't being served, and they're saying that even though you think you have lots of youth? So this kind of learning to be brave enough in the conversations that need to happen without jeopardizing the project. So that's the biggest learning. Are we brave enough to take these conversations to a different level, that they need to start happening, both in procurement, in voice, in the time it takes? Culture is not like another master plan. The word culture is problematic to have those conversations about what is defining culture. Cultural planning to me is problematic. So that's a big learning. Are we naming about, is there an arts plan? Because now municipalities are asking for several plans within a culture plan. So the learning is, how are we actually going to be able to speak up and be brave enough to sort of bring this stuff to the table? And this panel is probably a first step in that. So thank you.
Thank you. There's so much to unpack from that response. There's kind of the piece around authentic Indigenous placekeeping that's increasingly so critical to find ways to embed across processes. I think how we represent underserved perspectives and voices in a real way that doesn't diminish, but also still manages to maintain the momentum of the project. It's such a hard way.
I'm just going to jump in just to say that the whole DEI and Indigenous perspective has changed dramatically in the last 2 years. It's been sidelined again. Like, it rose up, we were there, and now it's retreated. So that's also a big challenge.
Well, that's another, I think we've got to put that on the list as well in terms of shifting emphasis, right, on diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, and how it informs our work and how we're, the resources we can commit to it. And sometimes we have to go beyond those resources that you pointed out in order to kind of serve the project in the way that it needs to be represented. And I also think that notion and thinking around data-driven is really also a piece in terms of decision-making and how we support clients in doing that, maybe when those processes aren't yet in place, but there's a real desire to lean into them. I know Bridget and I actually worked with a project where the foundations of that had to be built, and it took a little more work to get it out there. I'll just, put that out there. But these are really, I mean, you're starting to identify some key thematics, I think, across the group that are really relevant for this type of work, which I'm grateful for. The next question I have for you is about a balancing act. It's about, the demands of both coming up with a realistic and inspiring vision that everybody can rally behind and wrap their arms around, but then also how do we do that in a way that leads to streamlined and thoughtfully cared for actions and objectives that can run across the resources, the capacity, the funds that are available to a city for the long haul, which are sometimes we're asked to think about this across 3, 5, 10-year horizons. So there's a real balancing act for cultural planning work that is both, an exciting vision as well as being really pragmatic and kind of practical around the constraints. I'd love to hear how this panel balances that juggle. And I saw Megan nod, so I'm going to start in the middle.
Sure.
I can see you have it.
I don't think it's anything revolutionary, but I think that that's sort of the fundamental work of cultural planning, to be honest, that the point is to understand or to hear all of these desires and needs from the community, but then to put it into a way that's feasible and actionable in the implementation process, right? And understand within this specific context and these resources and this budget, how are you going to advance the needs of the community? Not to keep going back to economic impact, sorry, but I think that it's also a matter then of the things that do need additional investment. It really is aligning that with larger city priorities too. That it's really finding those areas then that the city is willing to invest in, or that you can make the case for additional investment when it does go outside of the existing resources and existing budgets. And so,
Annalee, would you like to go? You're sharing a mic.
Kristen, would you like to go? Mine was very similar. So looking, and I've already talked about this, but looking at the things that cross over and are woven throughout all the plans in my division, but then also other departments' visions and what they're trying to accomplish, and seeing what things we have that will answer their prayers as well, kind of thing, right? So, and then that just, and planning those out and getting them into, if it's a capital budget, 10 years out, we planned out every year for 10 years. So seeing where that is going to play a role and slotting that in, it's not that I have it, it's that I've planted that seed, and we'll have the conversation later, but you see it, everybody sees that, and trying to put that in with as much leeway as possible. But
I have nothing super earth-shattering to add to that, but it's more, just you have a vision, and it's having that conversation about, okay, that's the vision, let's work backwards, and let's have a conversation of what are all the different steps that need to happen to get to that end game. And to use more of an event management analogy, I was sharing with Kristen, back when I was managing events, I would always say to my team, think of it like a chess game. You have one move, but you can make this move or that move or that move. So for every step along the way, what's the ideal move? If that doesn't work, what's the other move you can make? How could you move your pawn? How could you do this? And to be ready for it and to action it out. So year by year, understand what is happening within the municipality. So it's all what colleagues have referenced, what's happening in economic development, what's happening in those other plans, what other major projects are happening, what other opportunities, and to basically have, a little chess game of every year, what move can you make to get to that end game, so it's little baby steps along the way.
Yeah, I love that chess game analogy. It's really nice because it's a full game and then there are the individual moves, so the balance is great. Annalee, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would say I'm really interested in systems change. So I'm interested in changing the way the system works. So how from the beginning, I think. So this is why the cross-departmental stuff is so critical in the way in which we work. So looking and meeting with other consultants on other plans when we're working on this plan or that plan, because in municipalities, there's always plans underway. So trying to meet with those consultants and have those conversations and have the work integrated into their plans and vice versa, and processes and policy bylaws and amendments, and like really nitty gritty kind of infiltration, if you want, like not just aligning or mentioning, but actually like changing bylaws and changing policy and asking for amendments and those pieces internally, and looking at the ecosystem of where we're working and what the role is of the city, township, whatever the municipal government entity is, and not overshadowing or saying that we're responsible for everything. So actually looking at the ecosystem and charting that out in terms of the origin story of how do we get here and where are we on that continuum of cultural development in the community, in terms of, are we at this place where we're just around beautification where cultural planning was? Like we try to do like a continuum really, and where do we want to get to? And the only way to do that is through deep community engagement of having people tell us what the origin of cultural development is in their community and where they're at and where are the milestones, where are the watershed moments, where are the pieces. So trying to track the continuum of cultural development internally as well as externally to see where in actual fact we're starting from. Because you can have all the vision, but if you're only at that kind of third stage of cultural development where they have the facilities and they are doing programming facilities, but they don't have the kind of internal systems and checks and balances in place and resources, then we only can move so far in 10 years. And the timeline has to be realistic. So we try to do kind of incremental systems change work that way and try to phase out the plan. So this phase may be building a foundation, the next phase may be kind of more pieces, but being realistic about the 10 years because it's not very long to achieve these kinds of visions. And a lot of times I've seen these visions vision is fine, but the work plan has to be realistic. And the other thing I think we try to do is put in a MEL framework, measurement, evaluation, and learning with progress indicators, and so that they can track the progress and it's realistic progress, like data in terms of quantitative data and qualitative data, and keep checking in with community, because a lot of times this is the first time that community's been brought together, the sector, to talk to the municipality. And so then it's like, what are the pulse checks? A year down the line, we need to report back to community and say this is where we're at. So keeping that in place and trying to do that. So I think that's for us, that's the kind of way we try to do that.
Thank you. We're just at about an hour, so I would love to take this as an opportunity. We have maybe 10 minutes left to invite anyone in the audience or on YouTube who might have any questions. And if you don't, I have a whole bunch, but I already see 2 hands up, so I'm not so worried about my questions at this juncture. Kristen?
Sure. I feel like I need to briefly contextualize.
Do you want to introduce yourself as well? Sorry.
Sure. My name is Haley. I'm the executive director of the West Regional Art Council. So it's a very odd role because we're a regional council that serves 18 different municipal sectors, ranging from 400 people to 20,000. So when I'm engaged in cultural planning activities, it's not for use by any individual municipality. It's really to serve the sector and to help them advocate for themselves. So I was struck by your comment, Annalee, about the plans for municipalities often being blamed by the sector, but they're not necessarily for them. So my question after that whole preamble is, in what way has your planning been a support and a resource for cultural communities and particularly artistic communities to advocate for themselves? And are there any particularly useful tools that you found helpful to that?
That was a great question from Kaylee Lens. I'm going to try to paraphrase and just give me eyebrows if I'm not doing it properly. But asking about tools and resources when it comes to advocacy for people to kind of become advocates around cultural planning, around the culture conversation, so that when the consultant leaves or when the point person leaves, there's still tactics and tools in place to kind of forward that vision. Does that sound? Okay, great. Anybody want to take a step?
I am a broker, but impact assessments I think are so key to be able to tell that story. Understanding, how many jobs is arts and culture supporting, what are the social impacts, community well-being impacts, economic impacts, all of these different impacts I think are such great advocacy tools for the sector to be able to have and to tell their story and to really prove or not prove, but like show what they bring to the community for sure.
Any other comments from the panel or thoughts?
Yeah, I guess on that note, in terms of assessments and impact, I think where I'm coming from is knowing where you're at now in order to assess properly the impact of this plan or that plan, and try to keep council and senior, council on their toes in terms of, the change that has been made in the community because of cultural activity. So, but it's actually looking at the current state is, where are we at now and how does this plan measure the change in the community because of the work that we've done? Because I don't know, I'm not, maybe economic is easier, but the social impacts of things, gathering, connectivity, all those things. But having that measurement, evaluation, and the learning from that and being able to speak to that, but at least getting the current piece, that's the hard, it's hard to actually get the current picture. And I would start there, what have we got going right now? And then 5 years or, every year kind of saying, what has changed in order to be able to measure that? Because that's the hard part, I think, with communities now, is that they're trying to assess the impact based on what exactly and what is culture versus something else. And can you claim that all in the sector? I don't know. That's my question. I don't know how it's done, so.
And I would just add, and it's a small step, but and I'm sure even the digital work that you're doing as well is even fundamentally encouraging arts groups to collect their data, and that can be like documentation, the photos, variety of different data inputs, whether it is just first-person narrative, survey, just even capturing it so that whether it does manifest in impact assessment, in a report to council or something. And I'm going to give Mass Culture a quick shout out here. I know they're doing a lot of great work with their data storytelling and doing that type of work with nonprofits to help them, to train them as to how to better collect their data to tell a story. So.
And I would just add to Bridget's excellent point, we have to increasingly be able to tell compelling bite-sized stories with a beginning, a middle, and an end to it. So the easier we can make that with what the narrative is, what are the kind of by the numbers polls, what's the journey been that we're going on, so you can show progression and have consistency across those different regional places so that maybe there's variability in terms of the issues they face, but you kind of know what the common ground is. So I think that would be really helpful. And so sometimes it's hard, it's noisy out there, and it's complicated work. So you need to also be able to pull back and kind of give that bird's eye view and follow with it across the journey. Kathleen, you had your hand up before. I don't know.
Yeah, so two things. First of all, to your question, there's an organization called ACCA Board that operates out of Quebec. And ACCA Board, sorry, that could be hard to do on the mic, but ACCA Board has a program called EVOKE. And EVOKE is a program that kind of flips the whole cultural planning piece onto the other side of bringing the artist to the table and then bringing the artist's perspective to the community, right? So, and that's more or less, ACCA Board takes that approach anyway. They're more connecting artists to municipalities than they are connecting municipalities to themselves, like CCNC is. So I would encourage you, especially those who speak French, to go and check out the EVOKE program from ACCA Board and have a look at that, because it is addressing that very question of how does the artistic community, how does the cultural community advocate for we need a cultural or an arts and culture policy in this particular municipality.
So that was Les Arts,
yeah.
PIVO, which is a good reference point that Kathleen was bringing out in response.
And then just one more thing, I just feel as though everybody at this conference who's going to be here for the next 3 days needed to be in this room today, because the things that have been shared and from all of you and some of the things, Annalee, that I've heard from you today as well are things that I know Teresa's on the board of CCNC would be saying, like, yeah, there's such good information that's coming out of this panel today. Like, really great. We should do it again next year.
I do have a question for you. So we go to great lengths to create these wonderful plans and strategies, and sadly, many of them sit on a shelf and never actually come to fruition. So I'm wondering if you might be able to share with us some examples of how you've been able to direct or guide those municipalities to actually get it to the council floor, to get the approvals, to get the resources, and what was the secret sauce to actually seeing those come to life and not get lost on a shelf?
So the question is, what is the secret sauce to avoiding gathering dust on the shelf, and instead having a cultural plan that kind of makes it to council, has an impact, gets the resources it needs? Open the floor to the panel. Any thoughts on advice?
I mean, I think it's kind of going back to what I was touching on earlier around like speaking the language of your audience. So, the priorities of the council at that moment, trying to position the plan within that type of language, that priority framework, I guess. Aligning it with tourism or with economic development or these other like priorities, especially in this like economic climate. I think that's what's resonating so much right now, is that they want to see that how it's that helping to support economic development. So in terms of success, like that's where we've really seen our success in recent months. Even the Mississauga project that I mentioned, we brought that to council, the economic impact assessment of live music, and they were so excited to hear the economic impact of live music, and were like following up with us asking how else can we support that sector and continue to help to grow that sector. So that's obviously just one anecdote, but I think speaking the language of the council at that time helps to kind of build that excitement and move things forward. And then you were saying earlier just about like tracking it too, of course, like building in implementation frameworks that have KPIs that you can help to track the progress of the plan over, a year, 5, 10 years. That also helps to continue the momentum, so that it's not just here's the plan, goodbye, but it's like, okay, so after a year we can check in and see how we moved it along, and have those written ways to measure how you're advancing the plan.
Yes, and you might say the same thing. I won't mention that there's a municipality that Annalee and I are working with, and just recognizing for that plan to even move forward, the amount of internal work that needs to happen ahead of time, and just recognizing that so much of those decisions, like to avoid having a plan sit on a shelf, to have those agreements internally, and so, and also going back to the idea of time in the whole cultural planning process, to have those points throughout the entire planning process where all decisions for what that chess piece is to move forward, do we all agree? Do we all understand what the repercussions are of this decision? Do we understand the financial, the human, the social impacts of each decision point, so that before it even gets to a council floor, you have that foundational work internally where you've had the meetings, you've had the conversations, you've had the agreements, everyone's on the same page, everyone knows what they're signing up for, so that when it comes to those points where are we doing this, you have that relationship, you have that trust, you have the receipts, to show this is not something that we've all just created as consultants, but it's been co-created with community, with the municipality, what have you. But yeah, sometimes it's that internal building work before you even start planning, like the time to understand the landscape, build the relationships, what have you. So yeah.
I would just add, so in what you're saying internally, what that looks like for us is when we have to take that implementation plan to council, it's a whole box in an Excel spreadsheet. We have to get that down to like 7 words or less. So obviously much higher levels, so that, but we internally need to have the conversation about what does that mean? Like those 7 words are very broad. We need to level set for everybody on this team what that actually means. And I think the other piece, which is something that we're working on, is our municipality is horrible at, and self-identified, horrible at, like, in terms of community engagement. When we start working on these plans, we get all this, like, ramp up, like, let's do these surveys, let's do these interviews, let's have all these workshops, and then we forget to circle back to all those people who were a part of that. So we are working on a community engagement strategy that says this is like ramping up. These are all the things and tools that you can use, but you really do need to circle back at the end. And I think that part is important for the community to buy into. This was the plan. It can't sit on a shelf. Like, that's not even an option because they bought into it. They are expecting us to do all this stuff. If we don't roll that out and it doesn't go through to council, like, we have broken all the trust that we have just worked up for. So I think that the community engagement piece from a consultant perspective is an important part to layer into that scope of work so that you've got the team in it that are looking for this at the end of the day. I'm very curious as we enter into an election year, what happens if our council doesn't value culture the way that this current council did? And how, like, do they just, like, I don't know, because I'm 3 years old basically in this world. And I don't know what that looks like, but I feel like the community being active in the process and then looking for those outcomes is a good place to start.
I think the establishment of the education, I wouldn't even say that, but the establishment of, and I've said it before, that interdepartmental group, that lives on. So once it's established for this plan, it then becomes like a solidified group of people that then are responsible for its implementation. And that's the same with the outside. We usually, as I say, we hire local artists and artist teams to do engagement. In Lethbridge, we're working on a public art plan over the summer, and that model of artist engagement is now considered a civic kind of priority because they were able to engage and get, I don't know, like way more surveys done than they've ever had before in any of their plans. So that's kind of becoming a model, like, how do we do engagement properly with underserved communities, Indigenous communities? So that's a piece. So there's some, like, precedent setting kind of processes that have been put in place. So having an arts advisory or arts advisory group or cultural council that then guides this work. But I would say the other piece, what I'm finding now is I actually just go to the source from the top. And by asking them for advice on how are we actually going to implement this and where are the resources going to come from? Is it going to be from the park levy? Can we take a percentage of that? Can we take it from, the community contributions, like the community benefit contributions, like looking for money? You tell us what will fly in terms of, like, the finance person, like, can we look at this with an inflationary increase over a certain amount of time? Like, I'm asking those questions before I go to the public now in this last year and a half. Like, I'm getting to the sources and saying, like, you guys have this master plan, and most of them put these master plan RFPs, and you will know this, they started way before this crunch. They went out with an RFP and then they're going, oh, wait, we're in retreat mode. Wait a minute. And the environment right now is to pull everything back, like back from arts councils, back from community, and pull it all in to having it be more controlled by civic, municipalities. So there's this kind of piece about how do you deal with that tension. So it's really around, like, getting to the sources and getting them around a table, asking for their advice, planning, same thing. What's going on? How can we fit in that? We do a project charter from the beginning where we lay out what this guideline is going to be like. This is kind of like, and then people actually have to say what they're willing to be commit to in the end, and it's signed off. So that project charter is signed off by director, whoever's going to be the sponsor of this, and so that team has to actually back it up. And then now we're finding with our strategies, it has to have a financial component to the strategy. Like if we're going to say that we're going to do this, we're going to tell you where the money's coming from and where it won't be in the kind of public report, but we did this cost capacity piece with Lethbridge. Like there's a lot of documents that aren't made public, but this is kind of the underneath work that gets done. So I would say that that kind of piece has a financial implication to those strategies. They're not just kind of like, we do outcome oriented versus goals and objectives. It's like, we want to, what's the outcome of this and how are we going to do it and what's the cost going to be? So there's a lot of that kind of underneath work that the public doesn't see. And then basically we come back and forth and we negotiate back and forth between this, like I need a win on this, like from the community. You need to have some wins here early because the community's going to be, all over you if you don't do this. But having worked in the system in municipalities before and being stifled and had no lots over 17 years of working in municipalities, I'm just more aware of what is feasible. And so I will bump up against it to the point where I know that I can't get any further. And then I'll back off. But I usually go in hard and then accept less.
It feels like we're just getting warmed up. But unfortunately, we're out of time. So I just want to take a moment on behalf of ACCA and the CCNC to thank our incredibly thoughtful and hardworking panelists who agreed to join us today. I also want to thank everybody who took the time to meet us in person, the super keeners who came early for this session. We're really grateful for that. And for anyone out in the ether of YouTube, thank you for joining us in the future, in the present, potentially. And with that, I feel like it was a really engaging panel, and I hope we have the opportunity to have more conversations like this together.